Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by an illustrator, a writer, a creator of really beautiful and wonderful books. We are here to discuss two in particular today, and I am so excited to get under the cover and learn more about these books. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your books, please?
Hello there. Thanks for having me on. I'm Adam Allsuch Boardman, and the books I'm talking about today are The Unexplained UFOs and The Unexplained Ghosts. There's no colon, just there it is on the front of the cover.
Gets right to the point, you know. So tell us a little bit about your journey as an artist, an illustrator, a writer. If you could tell us a little bit about your other books and what brought you to this project.
Sure. I started as an illustrator just under 10 years ago, professionally, in the second year of my degree at what was once called Leeds College of Art. I began working professionally for a museum design agency. I prepared illustrations for panel installations and diagrams. And from then on, I kept working with illustrations, often for a younger audience or a corporate audience, mostly very clear illustrations that are used to accompany text or large amounts of information. And that's what I enjoy most. And since then, I've worked with all sorts of different clients, one of which was a historic cinema in Leeds called the Hyde Park Picture House. And off the back of that project, a publisher in England called Nobrow approached me because they were interested in working on a book about the history of filmmaking. And because I'd done this big project about historic cinema, they thought I'd be a good match. And I began working on this book. There was a writer attached who had to drop out because of scheduling, and they asked if I could write it too, and I said, sure, why not? And to justify my writing ability, or to evidence my writing ability, I showed them my dissertation about Star Wars.
Wow. Oh, so what is your dissertation about? What do you argue about Star Wars?
My dissertation was called How Star Wars Became the Merchandising Paradigm. So it was a historic discussion of how Star Wars became so intertwined with merchandising and the way it's changed over the years. So it was a historical study, and that was very suitable as evidence for how I could write a historical study of filmmaking. And then after filmmaking, they asked if I knew about anything else, and I suggested UFOs. This would have been back in 2016. So this would have been the very first edition with Nobrow and the filmmaking book. And every 2 or so years, I work on another book with them, now under their children's book.
It's really fascinating to me how so many of those experiences and interests all sort of come together in your books. I have to say, I really love that Star Wars project and a lot of the pop culture stuff that you talk about on your website. On your website that you mentioned that you like Star Trek, X-Files, and Twin Peaks. That is my sort of 90s holy trinity of speculative fiction shows that I can watch endlessly. I love so that it informs your interests here very much in the UFOs books and the ghosts. Has your interest in these pop culture properties and the history of some pop culture phenomena, does that also inform your process or your style in any way?
I'm a big fan of collecting information in my brain and trying to express it in my artwork, whether that's Easter eggs or specifically to fulfill a client's brief, squeezing all those delicious morsels of information as usually, hopefully, simple and clear illustrations. That can range from very complicated corporate briefs where there's a lot of information that is initially beyond my understanding, and then in drawing it, I understand it myself, and hopefully the audience can understand it. I would say that my collecting of information has just become more formalized by working on these long-term book projects. Usually they take about a year and a half, alongside which I'll be working on other books, sometimes not writing them, just contributing the illustrations, or I'll be working on advertising or editorial briefs. So it's really a joy just to be able to accumulate trivia or understand a subject better so I can better explain it through pictures and words.
Yeah, it's I can absolutely see how those experiences inform the style because in these two books you present a lot of information. They're dense with facts and fascinating little anecdotes from history, but it doesn't overwhelm you with that information. It's accessible still, and I can see how, yeah, if you are designing chirons for museums, you have to compress large amounts of information into a very tiny space. And so, yeah, I imagine that makes you very efficient.
Thank you. I'm glad it comes across clearly in that way. In the research of these books, there's some materials that can be quite oblique or hard to understand for someone who's not familiar with the subject, a lot of interesting terminology or assumed knowledge. And it was always our hope that these books were accessible and in such a way that it doesn't talk down to the audience, which is, I think, especially important for younger readers, because these were the kind of books I would enjoy reading as a kid, books on the supernatural, or that could be ghosts, that could be urban legends, that could be anything really. It's what I loved reading about, it's what I loved watching in the form of X-Files on borrowed VHS tapes. Uh, Sometimes it was broadcast on TV in the UK. But it was the stuff I loved consuming. Got to it included, visiting interesting places, stone circles, haunted castles. We've got plenty of them over here in the UK. You can't really go anywhere without stumbling into something that's supposedly haunted.
Think the love of the X-Files comes across in the UFO book, which I would love to talk a little bit more about. I'm going to start
Sure.
with a really obscure question. There's one particular picture of a gray alien that looks like it is composed like a still from Jose Chung's Outer Space from the opening. Did you use any visual references from the X-Files in this project?
I know exactly what image you're referring to. That is a depiction of a popular meme that circulated some years ago. There's a page in the book which talks about where UFOs exist now in popular culture, and that would include memes because that is one way in which we communicate. And I have to say it out loud, it's the I Lamo meme, which there is a picture of a rather dazed looking grey alien that circulates in memes, and it is specifically from that episode of The X-Files, which I think is my favorite. It's a great episode that really compresses almost the full gamut of the phenomena. It expresses so much in such a short window in a way that you don't often see. And it's funny that one screenshot from that episode got used and circulated in a meme, and it was a delight to include that in the book somewhat cheekily.
That's excellent. Yeah, that I was like, wow, that image is just so burnt into my brain because that was also my
Yep.
favorite episode. And reading your book actually really helped me appreciate how well the show represented the stories that actually exist, people's accounts. Yeah, the way that they dressed Jesse Ventura as a man in black is like exactly
Yep.
like some of the historical stories that you mentioned. So
Mm.
fascinating. Um, so I would love to ask um, about comparing the UFO book to the Ghost book. In both, you compress a very large amount of history into a pretty short but yet very informative text. What was your process for narrowing down information? I imagine writing a dissertation helps because you do a lot of research and then you have to say goodbye to a lot of it that doesn't make it into your final project. But like, what is your process for winnowing down all the information that you know and the research that you do into something so accessible?
It is difficult. UFOs was the second book I wrote, so I'd uh, I'd reached a point where I sort of understood what was going on and understood what was involved with making a book. It was a great learning curve. Um, a lot of the what I wanted to include information-wise worked in tandem with what I wanted to include visually. I wanted to include a visual variety of images and perhaps things that people hadn't seen before, or specific cases that don't usually make it into certain books because they're unusual or they're just hard to illustrate sometimes. So it was a challenge to find things that were unique or represented different areas of the phenomena to show a full gamut, let's say. So with both UFOs and ghosts, it was my aim to find a diversity of experiences and bits of information, anecdotes throughout time. Uh, Basically, I begin with a very long reading list of good old physical books bought in bookshops or borrowed from wonderful libraries
Excellent.
or read in situ or using great online library services to borrow things virtually. Um, and I would construct a sort of timeline, um, knowing how many pages I had that I could fill with words, and knowing that most of the pages end up being used by images. So it's a very difficult task, um, kind of streamlining it and uh, converting what can be quite complicated stories into what is a paragraph on the page with an illustration next to it. And sometimes that's just quite basic conversations with the in-house editing team and deciding what's working, what's not working, what's more interesting, what's successful. Um, but there isn't too much that gets cut out. Sometimes it'll end up being an Easter egg somewhere else in the book. If I really felt bad about something getting left out, it would be secreted away somewhere.
That's good to know because it can be really difficult to kill your darlings, especially in research when a piece of information or a particular image feels so hard won. So,
That's right. And people will have their own favorite stories about UFOs. And, you have to include something about Roswell in the UFOs book. You have to include in the UK the Rendlesham incident, which is well known, or at least is well known to UFO enthusiasts in the UK. I don't think the general population knows about it. um, and you have to include references to the X-Files. I would have done that anyway, but it's important to include it. And then there's, finding room to include all the other things that people might not have known about before, and including the skeptical side, which sometimes can be abandoned because it's not as immediately fun, but I find it fun. I find the fun in thinking about other explanations for phenomena interesting.
Oh, 100%, because I think that even if you do approach it with skepticism or not believe a particular account or what have you, it's just as interesting a question to me. Well, what made you think that happened, or what makes you need to think that this happened until like that can be, yeah, just as fascinating, the psychological phenomenon behind these things. And I think that that's one of the reasons, to link back to something you said before, that the books don't condescend to their audience, especially to children. Like those are big concepts, and you trust your audience to get them. I also noticed that, when you're talking about Things like the Nazca lines and the ancient alien theories, like you bring up some of
Yeah.
the sort of racist undertones to those theories. Yeah, it's a very well done in tone and content, just like really, really lovely.
There was a book on that subject why I won't say who the author was, but I would underline every time there was something really problematic about what they said. Uh, and I just sort of became very frustrated that sometimes there's a limited perspective presented by books, and I wish they would present other options for the audience to consider. Occam's razor explanations, or explanations grounded in what people have been discussing in academia or the subject itself, because skeptics have existed within the study of UFOs since the phenomena, began, or at least when it was uh, born as what we recognize today. In 1947, uh, when the Kenneth Arnold incident occurred above Mount Rainier. The phenomenon was born anew, although people had seen strange lights in the sky before. That's when it all really kicked off in the way that we recognize now. And since then, a lot of people have worked on that subject, and I found those stories fascinating in themselves, people that aren't generally remembered um, outside of books on the subject.
In terms of the Ghost book, that was an even larger task that you had in terms of taking a long history and narrowing it down, because ghosts have just existed as a concept for a lot longer than UFOs have.
Yep.
Was it hard to pick examples? Did you have favorite hauntings that you just had to include besides the ones that you mentioned before?
Yeah, ghost is a huge subject and it strays into, questions of religion and anthropology, big, big, big ideas, big concepts. Um, so I did begin in prehistory, um, and then sort of the book sort of speeds up towards the centuries we're more familiar with and the introduction of more recognizable popular culture. Um, yes, there were certain hauntings I was really interested in. I was quite fascinated by the era of psychical research in the UK, which was known by other names, including um, the ghost hunter Harry Price, who was a very interesting character, controversial character, but he was known as a bit of a showman, but also popularized the, let's say, career as a ghost hunter. And I would say many ghost hunters today owe a lot to his way of doing it. Some of them haven't really changed that much. Um, but he was best known for Borley Rectory, which is a famous haunting in the UK. And there's a page on that specific haunting, and I just found that whole area of history really interesting when there was the post-American Civil War fascination with spiritualism, which spread to the UK and then spread back again and dominated the Western world in a very interesting way. Um, it felt as though it was a new science, and attracted all sorts of interesting people, such as the writer of Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle. Uh, many people believed that at that time we were on the edge of a new frontier of science that we were going to explain what happens in the afterlife. A strange sort of optimism, I think. Um, I just found that whole era really fascinating, but the book itself is such a broad look at history. There's only so much I could dedicate to it in the text. But I tried to squeeze as much of it in there as possible.
You do a really good job, I think, and this is in both books, just through sort of like using taxonomy, like you sort of lay out the categories of types of hauntings or types of ghosts from different cultures. And then I think like that lets you organize it in a really efficient way and include lots of examples while keeping it manageable. I was absolutely obsessed with the concept of a time slip dinosaur. I was like,
Yeah.
I would love to see a dinosaur ghost. That would really make my day, my life, perhaps.
Yeah, why not?
Mhm.
Yeah, time slips is a good area. There's something I was familiar with because of a science fiction writer called Nigel Kneale. I'm not sure if you pronounce the K, but he was a British TV writer, and he was best known for Quatermass, which was a science fiction series. But he did something called The Stone Tape, which was a TV play about a haunting. And it was the idea that perhaps stones themselves are conduits for ghosts. But there was a few other plays he did, The Road, and he did an adaptation of The Woman in Black, which was remade a few years ago by, I think it was Hammer Horror. It could have been Hammer, not sure. Anyway, it's a good film with Daniel Radcliffe. But yeah, time slips I find just fun as a concept. That's what I really found interesting about ghosts is that there's just so many theories that have cropped up over the centuries about what they are, whether they are spirits of the dead or whether people are somehow slipping into another time or seeing some sort of window in time. I find that really fascinating as much as I do the rationalist, more skeptical explanations. And I think it was worth putting on putting on paper. I do remind the reader that usually the more rationalist or skeptical explanation is the most likely, but I don't try to push too much because it can come across as condescending. I trust the audience.
You're honoring, each of us has a Mulder and a Scully inside us, and you're honoring both of them. So,
That's right.
well, thank you so much for coming and talking about these books. What are you working on right now? What's on your horizon?
I'm currently working on two books. One would be the follow-up to Urban Legends, which had its first edition out, was it last year? It's quite easy to lose track of time when all you do is draw pictures and write words. Um, yes, I'm writing another paranormal-ish book, let's say, and it'll slot quite happily alongside ghosts, UFOs, and urban legends. I'm also contributing to a STEM children's book, which is about careers, let's say, and it's diagrams that will explain different scientific processes, different engineering processes, complicated things for a young audience. So at the moment, working on two books at the same time, which is good fun.
Wow. Well, Godspeed, happy writing and happy drawing. And yeah, thank you for your time again. This has been delightful.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, listeners, please check out The Unexplained UFOs and Ghosts. UFOs is currently out in early July as we record. Ghosts will be out by the time that you hear this, so please check them out. All right, it is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.